Trascrizione non la voglio. È avviata? Sì. Okay, so good evening and welcome. This is the second seminar for the Sport International Politics seminar. We have a guest, as I mentioned you in the previous class. We have Nicola De Martini Ugolotti, which work as a senior lecturer in Sport and Physical Culture Department in Bournemouth University and Business School. He has worked on several aspects of between sociology and anthropology of sport. He's here with a grant of the Institute of Advanced Studies of University of Bologna. So it's a way to improve the exchange between academics, and so it's a great opportunity, and I really thank him because it's the first time that our guest is physically present and not only online. So in the third year we managed to add a guest in presence, and he will discuss about the topic of kinesthetic city. We'll do as we have done with Lorenzo Venuti, a broader presentation. The slides are already on Virtuale, so you can find the slide already on Virtuale, and then after the presentation, we will have time for question and discussion as we have done last time. So, Nicola, the floor is yours, and thank you again.
So, first of all, good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. If you struggle to, as I speak, if you need for me to stop, or if you have any questions, please stop me anytime. Okay. So, and second thing that I would like to say is to thank Nicola. I had the pleasure to meet Nicola a few years ago. I think it was 2018, and Nicola is a great scholar. He's a great colleague. It's always a pleasure to think together, to work together. So it's a double pleasure for me to meet you guys for the first time and to have a chance for this exchange with Nicola. So I get through the course of this lecture, hopefully, to why this title, Kinesthetic Cities. And I guess the key point that I want to start with is to see how the urban, which is a context that most of us are familiar with, we live in it, we visit it, we play sport in it, is a key site, a key space to understand how sport and politics, both the global politics and the urban politics, merge, converge, and clash. Okay, so I'm going to start with this quote. You tell me if I'm in the way, but I'm short enough, I think, not to obstruct the view. I can do this. So I want to start with this quote, which kind of makes a very good point as a reminder to start this conversation with you. So the city is actually the sport, where sport first started. We know the sport as we play it now wasn't around, hasn't always been around. Okay, sport is almost is a byproduct of modernity, of industrial revolution, and industrial revolution happened in cities. So as a starting point to remind us why it is important to look at cities and urban context when we look at the politics of sports. At the same time, when we want to look at the relationship between sport, politics, and cities, this is not just along one dimension. There are many different dimensions along which sport, politics, and cities play out. Okay, and this is the first kind of explainer of why I wanted to use the term kinesthetic cities, which is a quite recent way of understanding this relationship. That kind of invite us to see cities as not this static, passive background where things happen, including sports or politics, but actually are part and parcel of this dynamic. Okay, so the way that cities are planned, the way that cities are built or are managed, has a role in making possible or difficult for urban residents, for example, to play sports. Okay, so sports, politics, and cities play out when, for example, in the case of sport mega events, you have huge urban planning decisions around how the city that is going to host a sport mega event. Let's think about Summer Olympic Games or Winter Olympic Games, World Cup, Men and Women's World Cup is going to look thanks to hosting these events, okay? These are often huge, substantial, and radical changes that have impact and implications for people living in cities. But also there are some more everyday and mundane and ordinary way in which the way that cities are planned and built has an impact on how we can or cannot play sport, okay? So all the reminders that we meet often in public spaces about what we can and cannot do in specific spaces are reminders that the way that cities are built is not objective, is not the same for everyone. And these are kind of attempts to manage, to govern how people engage with cities. Often, especially when you think about young people, for example, young people who don't have sometimes the means to engage with the usual gym or sport clubs for a range of different reasons, this comes to a very evident domain in which everyday urban politics play out, okay, for where people can and cannot play sport. Okay, so the idea of kinesthetic cities as the key starting point for this conversation is thinking about how cities have a role to play. They are not just this passive background where things happen, including sport and politics. And I'm going to focus in the course of the next, let's say, 45 minutes, 50 minutes, around two main ways in which we can understand this relationship. The first is the way in which, again, sport kind of initiates what have been called event-led urban transformations, you know, the top image that you see. But also I want to turn to something that is possibly more closely related to my own work that I've been conducting in the UK, in Italy, in Brazil, about how the everyday practice of sport reminds us and enables us to see a little bit more clearly the different meanings and practices around what it means to live in a good city and who belongs in the city, okay? All the barriers that play out in everyday context around who really belongs in a city, and that a lot of time play out also in barriers to play sport, okay? Hopefully throughout this lecture, this will become clearer. But let's start with the event-led urban transformation and urban kind of regeneration. And I think it's a good idea to start with some definitions, so we have a common ground to start with. This is a definition that I think is useful to actually start to think about what is a sport mega event, because not all sport events are mega events, and not all events that are mega are sport events. Okay, so what characterizes a sport mega events? What distinguishes it from other events? And this is the definition. So mega events are ambulatory occasions of a fixed duration. Okay, that means simply you have events that every 4 years, every 2 years, and they change place. They are not always in the same place, even though there are talks about making sport mega events as taking place only in one city throughout, including for sustainability reasons. But that's a talk for another time. But so far, these are ambulatory, they're itinerant, okay? They attract a large number of visitors. We will see how many to define it as a mega event, have a large mediated reach. And just a reminder that what makes most of the economic output of sport mega events are the rights to show the mega events in televisions most of the times, and this since Los Angeles 1984. So the reach that is mediated through television rights, through the internet now, or through the radio and newspapers has a huge role in defining what makes a sport event mega. Come with large costs, and often very large costs, in increasingly large costs, and have large impacts on the built environment and the population. The image that we saw in the last slide kind of give us an idea of the planning, the building impact, the built environment. The photo that you see down here gives us an idea of the impact on the local population. This is a photo that's been taken in Brazil between the hosting of the Men's World Cup and the Summer Olympic Games. And this was a moment of huge social unrest, because a large part of the population saw the investment, the public investment in infrastructure that was needed for these sport mega events as being spent in the wrong way. Brazil is a huge country, is a very important and powerful country, but is crossed by many inequalities. And the large part of the population will say, we don't really need this. We really need more education, hospitals. And we will see later on in the lecture, this is not isolated to Brazil. It's also something that characterizes issues closer to us, in Western Europe, in North America, not just in the so-called global South. Okay, but let's stick for a moment now to the definition of sport mega events. So we have a definition, and we have also a blocked. Okay, here we are. So there are different, and this definition is important because there are many kinds of sport events that are nevertheless important. There are major sport events like a Champions League final for the football fans in the room, or the Super Bowl, the NFL Super Bowl. There are even talks of gig events, where the scale that we have been talking so far on mega events is going to be obscured by the costs, by the impact, and by the mediated reach that these mega events will enable. Okay, so far this is just talking, but it's good to see what comes next. Okay, and we are defining sport mega events because it's useful to kind of get a grasp of all the issues that we just mentioned. What are the benefits, if any? And it's important to ask if there are at all any benefits in hosting sport mega events. What are the needs of these sport mega events? What is the rationale for a nation, for a city to host sport mega events? What are the costs? What resources are needed? And what are the impacts? Okay, so this is why I think just to start, it's good to have a definition. So how big is a sport mega event? It has to sell at least 1 million tickets. Okay, so this is what we're talking about. In terms of mediated reach, this is the kind of amounts that we're talking about. And we are just talking about Summer Olympics, Winter Olympics, the Men's European Cup, the UEFA Cup. The costs, which have been, again, by the way, increasing exponentially, are a huge part of what makes a sport event mega. And the impact, as I mentioned. And the impact, we can also kind of divide it in different kind of dimensions. You have the urban transformations, building infrastructure, transport infrastructure, stadiums, the village where the athletes will be hosted, the media village. We are talking about very substantial urban transformations. And also the concept of legacy, which today, for the sake of time, I will not focus much. Maybe if there's any question, we can look at this later, but it is also important to keep in mind. The idea of legacy, if you look back at all the declaration about why we want to host a sport mega events, legacy will be there as a buzzword. Okay, what legacy means and to what extent it actually materializes is another matter. But it's really, really one of the selling points of organizing committees saying we really want to do this. Okay, So legacy is something that is part of the impact, either the desired impact or the negative impact of a sport mega events. And in terms of the idea of legacy, we're going to watch later a short video about the legacy of the Rio Olympic Games, the Summer Olympic Games in 2016. And this probably will give us an idea of what we are talking about. So let's, we mentioned what is a sport mega events, how we can define it. Let's see why we want to host sport mega events. If I can ask you a very quick, random chat, no right or wrong, what do you think is one good reason to host a sport mega event for a host nation? Yes? Yeah? So to literally put a country on a map. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. And I see some nodding, so I guess you agree? Yeah, so kind of spreading out a positive image. So, yeah, and power, projecting power. Very good. And I guess, yeah. Increase the government budget. So kind of hopefully getting some positive economic return. So kind of economic investment. Okay, yes, absolutely. Attract tourists, yeah, so possibly related to this positive economic outcome. So we really want to do this, because people will find us on a map and we'll see how good we are at organizing things. So entertainment, the spectacle, the show, yeah. So I would say you pretty much cover it also. I can skip this part. But no, yeah, exactly. You really summarize the key main points that are the selling points for organizing committees to pitch to the local population to say why we want this, okay? Another way to also explain this is the idea of soft power. Have you ever heard about this, soft power? Yeah, this is what you were meaning when you said, okay. So, and again, it's a kind of projection of power that doesn't go along just, military might or economic power to influence, like the power to put sanctions on other people, so you influence them. And so it's a way of influencing others by the means of institutions, cultural institutions, including sport. The BBC in the UK is a good example of soft power because of its reach, its fame for kind of good cultural products, reliability, and so on. But you have many things. Music can be another one. Sport is another one. Okay, so and this is really a key element. And just don't mind me if I do some examples that start from the UK, but the UK really used the chance of the London Olympic Games to try and reposition itself on the global map. We're talking about the former colonial empire who had a little bit of an existential crisis in the second part of the 20th century. And it's quite important to see how they were invested in building themselves as a huge sporting superpower in order to reposition themselves on the global map. And then with all the hoped for positive economic and influence benefit. But it's by no chance that you have this title of a very prestigious sport management journal that says that Britain becomes a sporting superpower, because a lot of times the hosting of sport mega events is almost compared to an arms race. So there are parallels in terms of vying for influence. So there's an idea of state branding, and I think some of you mentioned this idea of showing that the government is good projecting both externally, that's the idea of soft power, but also internally. Okay, so also for the local populations, like we are a government to trust with our decisions and with your votes and so on. So it's state branding, and it's not by chance that a lot of sport mega events in the last couple of decades took place in what are called like BRICS, the core BRICS countries: Brazil, Russia, China, South Africa. China more than once. The only one that is missing is India. Fully honest, I'm not completely sure why. but we can have a debate about this. But yeah, it's still quite relevant and emblematic that we are talking about nations that are trying to assert themselves on the global scene. And sport mega events are seen as a key tool to do that. Okay, state branding, but also urban branding, because as part of this projection of an image of ideally attracting a positive economic return in terms of investments, tourists, you want to create this infrastructure that can receive all these flows of money, of people, and so on. And sport mega events are seen as a rule as playing a role in these processes. Now, this is one way of explaining this, but this is not the only way of explaining why really nations and organizing committees can compete to host sport mega events. So on one hand, you have this narrative that you have brilliantly captured, that the idea is that sport mega events are a not to miss opportunity for development. Economic development, state development, economic development, did I say economic development? Yes, urban development, okay? So who doesn't want that, okay? The problem is that sometimes these mostly play out in what has been called, and I think somebody mentioned spectacle, in a kind of what has been called celebration capitalism. What it means is that you have a huge circus coming to town for a couple of weeks, and until then, everything seems to be perfect and works smoothly, and then and there's a lot of money thrown in to maintain this spectacle, but in the end, the actual results are far from what has been kind of sold to the public, either local public or international public. And again, unfortunately, we have quite a few examples, and these are not based, these are kind of across the board. Vancouver Winter Olympic Games finished to pay the debts that they accumulated. The Winter Olympic Games they organized, I think it was in the late 20th century. They finished to pay their debt 30 years later. Okay, so not really the best economic investment you can make. Okay, still a lot of money thrown in and quite few people making a huge gain. But how this is distributed is worth asking. So this is why this is called celebration capitalism, because yes, there's a lot of money involved, and increasingly so, a lot of big changes. To what extent, and these big changes create opportunities for connections, new infrastructure, transport infrastructure, market connection, investment, and so on. So this is really a site of connection between stakeholders at every level, political level, market level, and so on. But again, not everyone gets to enjoy the benefits, okay? Coming back to that picture that was taken in Brazil, and we will see later on, was a leitmotif in other contexts as well. So we want to remember that as well, because not everyone gets a share at all. Some literally pay the cost, for hosting the sport mega events. And this is an image from here. Sometimes huge urban transformation to make space for stadiums, athletes village, media village, and transport infrastructure. They take space. And cities have the tendency to be densely populated. So where do you make space for this infrastructure? Usually in the areas that are more economically deprived, that are seen with the excuse of making it an opportunity for economic development, that are erased, their inhabitants displaced to make space for this spectacle. Okay? Does it make sense so far? So what I want to do now, to bring home this idea of sport mega events as sites of really huge opportunities. Okay, I'm not undermining that, but also site of striking inequalities that become evident. These inequalities are already there, but to some extent, the hosting of sport mega events make them even exacerbate them, sometimes even more. Okay, so what I want to show now, just to give a sense of what I'm talking about, I'm going to show you a video about Rio 2016, the Summer Olympic Games, and how these dynamics that I just mentioned here played out on the ground. Okay, good. And it makes sense so far? Any question? No? Okay. Okay, make sense? So I guess that gave an idea much clearer that what we discussed so far, what is at stake. But there is one, and please come back, and this will be a topic for an entire course. Okay, so I just want to raise this as a point to underline one thing among the many that we could do: the map. Okay, how for the aim of repositioning Brazil on the global map, on the global political chess board, had to happen somewhere, had to happen in a concrete space of a city, okay, and had intersected with existing urban politics, urban inequalities, social issues. And then kind of these two became kind of entangled, intertwined. Okay, this is one of the key points that hopefully comes clear. The city as a site where politics at different scales converge and clash, and how it is important as a site to understand this, to understand the implications of these kind of political scenarios. Okay, so, and I think this is an important point to make, because sport mega events are sites of opportunity, of investment, of political projection, but are always often, and you couldn't get it more clearly than this, as a site of contestation. So an academic, David Horton, said that despite all the narratives that say sport and politics, they should never mix. They don't stand together. Can remind us, and this is a very good reminder of this, the sport and politics are always entangled because sport is part of society. And therefore, Horn says there is a politics in and there is a politics of sport mega events. That is, within the sport mega events, there are a lot of political play about showing an image, projecting an image. But as you make this happen, as you build this image, there are a lot of political issues at stake. Okay, so, and these political issues play out in many ways. There are, and Horn mentions 3 sides of contestation, and I think there's a 4 that we need to consider also going forward. The first side of contestation, this dimension of contestation, is rights and labor, so human rights and labor rights. The second is the idea of legacy. We've seen some examples of what kind of legacy you created. If you follow up and look at what happened to much of the infrastructure of sporting infrastructure that you've seen built there, you see that the legacy wasn't exactly what was hoped for or what was sold to the international and the national opinion. But also there is the issue of environment. Okay, again, this is beyond the scope of this lecture, and I don't want to bore you too much with opening too many tabs, but this is another key issues, the issues of environment, the environmental impact of sport mega events. Okay, so just keep it there for for your own interest or for future reference. Okay, and Horn says it's very important because politics is always part of sport. Okay, but plays out in different ways. There's a politics of denial. People saying, oh no, sport and politics, they shouldn't mix, they are not mixed. And that has a political impact because you deny the existence of these issues. And there's a politics of acknowledgement of those who say, really, there are issues that are related to this taking place of this event or to sports, and it's important to make them visible, to do something about them so that people know about it. Okay, so that's what it means by saying there's a politics of denial and the acknowledgement. Okay, they both have a political role, but they play out differently. So let me just give you a quick overview of what we mean when we talk about rights, for example, as a site of contestation. Just to give you an example, okay? And this is just a quote of Horn that I mentioned earlier. So in terms of rights, we have seen it in the video, the forced evictions of citizens without due process of compensation, okay? That happened in Rio, you have seen the scale. It happened in London. So it's not just for contexts that are cold in the global south. It's a smaller scale, but no less impactful for the areas involved. And in fact, in London, this process was linked to another process that is called gentrification, which is a much slower and apparently less violent process of displacement that simply makes less affordable for people to live in the area that has been regenerated through this sport mega event. Okay, so that maybe they're not being kicked out or their house demolished, but their landlords, maybe they raise their rents, so or all the other costs is raised, so they simply is not affordable to live there anymore. So there is that, the eviction of citizens, the abuse and exploitation of the migrant workers. And just to let you know, I think last week or earlier this week, the United Nations Human Rights and Social Responsibility kind of Commission published a report on the human rights framework, the human rights issues related to the Men's World Cup in Qatar 2022. That makes for a kind of a difficult reading, but also a very important reading. And also it's interesting because what is laid out there is what FIFA should do to remedy to these human rights issues, which is very interesting for people like Nicola and me, because let's see to what extent these recommendations are kind of taken up, because they talk about kind of remedy that is for what happened in the past, but also a forward-looking remedy. So it's not just, oh yeah, went bad, sorry, here's some sort of compensation, but actually a kind of a remedy that makes up and build a different way of doing things, okay, not just for those impacted. So if you are interested, the link is there, you just need to click it. But then again, these are not the only issues related to rights, because when it comes to hosting sport mega events, with the related issues with security that are associated to it, it becomes very often very difficult for civil society and rights organizations to even make their points, maybe against the hosting sport mega events. So you have a crackdown, security crackdown of dissenting voices, which is maybe not the best to have, so to speak, which implies threats, intimidation, arrest, journalists, civil society actors, and that kind of impinge to what is already there. Okay, so there are issues in every context, and these are often exacerbated, okay, somehow by the hosting of sport mega events. And again, it's interesting in terms of the politics of these events, how key players, very influential players in the organization of these events, play their part, acknowledge or not these issues. This is the IOC, which kind of says, oh, we are always in favor of maximum application of human rights, but it's not up to us to monitor human rights. Again, it's an open question, and there's an increasing pressure to make the IOC, when they co-organize Summer Olympic Games and Winter Olympic Games, to have a responsibility to monitor human rights, because it's too easy to say, oh, yes, we are here to promote human rights, but then what happens there is not really our concern. Okay.
Sorry if I interrupt, just to say that these considerations are very important for what we are going to do next, not Friday, but next Friday with the readings on Saudi Arabia. It will be an opportunity to discuss about exactly this topic. So thank you for introducing.
That was obviously planned. And that's why Horn is very important to know about the idea of the politics of denial and acknowledgement, because in light of this kind of declaration from the FIFA, okay, that says that sometimes less democracy is sometimes better for organizing a World Cup, okay? So how, claiming that sport and politics don't mix really don't stand the test of these often very candid acknowledgement that politics and sports are really pretty much entwined, and sometimes not in the positive way that is usually kind of portrayed. Okay, so, and again, but sport mega events are sites of contestation, and are sites of contestation that play out in the urban most of the times. And this, again, just a reminder of what we were saying. This is a quote that to me captures very well this point, okay? When you say that sport and politics don't mix, you are making invisible the political issues that sports is a conduit of, okay? So these are images taken from the political manifestations against Paris 2024 Olympics game. But these are not just recent issues. Sport, there is an argument that this kind of sport boycotts were kind of pivotal in the creation of an international consensus against apartheid in South Africa. Okay, so the isolation of the South African sporting teams playing international level contributed to create, to consolidate a consensus that these should not be accepted at the international stage, let alone in South Africa itself. And I'm mentioning this because much closer to us, there are increasing calls to ban Israel from UEFA, FIFA, the IOC, international sporting mega events for quite a few issues, including apartheid, being an apartheid state, including breach of human rights, and not only related to the current genocide in Gaza. So there are quite constant elements through which sport and politics mix together and play out in the urban, okay? And even more so, these calls have increased because if you compare the very immediate reaction and ban of Russia as soon as it invaded Ukraine in February 2022, and you compare the kind of the feet dragging related to the request to ban Israel for arguably much more infringement of human rights, you can see some clear issues there that play down at the level of political issues and political negotiations. So, but again, the key points is, to me today, always coming back to the point that where these political issues play out is the urban, okay? Make sense so far? Still awake? We're almost done. So I just finished this side as a reminder of this element, but as I started the lecture by saying there's another dimension of the urban politics and the global politics of the urban, and that's related more to the everyday dimension of city making, which is possibly closer to our experience of the cities, the ordinary experience. So we don't need to live in a city that hosted a sport mega events to take a taste, to feel the politics of sport in the urban, okay? And that's why increasingly, kind of with a group of colleagues, we are making the point that yes, it's very important to look at the politics that play out in relation to sport mega events, but we should not limit our focus to that. And because again, where sport happens, it's across all over every city in the world. This is an image that we took in Sheffield as part of our research. Sport happens in back alleys, in narrow streets, happens everywhere, wherever people want to play sport, okay? And to what extent this is perceived as a positive thing, as something that should be done, it's often a reflection, again, of other social and political tensions that play out in urban context. And just to stay close to here, I don't know if we know where Monfalcone is around in Italy. Yes? Good. So Monfalcone is not that far from here. It's in Italy, so it's not really, these issues don't play out very far from us. And we could possibly find plenty of examples in Bologna or in Turin, that's the city where I'm from. But I think this is quite relevant because in Monfalcone, which is a city of about 30 to 40,000 inhabitants, and there's a substantial Bengali community that went to work in the shipyards. Okay, And that became, again, a site of contestation because the far-right kind of municipality leadership decided that this was undesirable because it symbolized almost a takeover of a different culture, over Italian culture. We are talking about groups of Bengali men, but often increasingly women, playing cricket in public spaces. Okay, so that's quite a stretch, but that's quite emblematic of how the politics of the everyday are linked to of definitions of who belongs to the nation and who belongs here. Okay, they play out in the very banal and really hard to comprehend ban to say you cannot play here because you are not from here, even if you have been living here for 20, 30 years or so. Okay, and this is just one of the examples. My own research looked at other practices from parkour to capoeira to even just informal volleyball and football. They become sites of contestation where apparently one would say it's just leisure, just games, but what these games represent about who is here and who should be here is what is really at stake. Okay? So, just to finish, I promise, as you can see, conclusions. What are the key kind of take-home messages that I hope we can get from this lecture today? First, this is a kind of as a classic quote that is often used to underline why we want to link sport and society, and not just understand it as a kind of biomedical domain of society where you just focus on optimizing performance and so on. Sport is more than just a reflection of society. It's where really society and culture play out and can be changed. So this is a site where things can change. It's not just where things happen, okay? Where the powerful has more influence over the powerless, okay? That's far for granted, okay? So this is just as a reminder of a kind of a classic quote. But again, the key points that I would like to make here that I would like to make through the conversation today is that it's not just that the sport in itself is political, but it's where sport takes place matters. Okay, and what happens as sport takes place or cannot take place, like in the case in Monfalcone, is really something that we can and we want, and we are able to pay attention. We have the tools to understand what happens there. And it happens so that the political salience of sport plays out a different scale. It plays out when it materializes the convergence of global and urban politics through the taking place of sport mega events. Again, the calls to stop Olympic Games in exchange of better housing and better schools didn't just happen in Brazil. This was Los Angeles. Okay. But also there are some politics that play out around us every day, and we can pay attention to them as well, because again, they have a political salience, as to the Bengali community in Monfalcone. But it's not the only example. Think about the struggle that women had to make in order to be considered as legitimate cyclists. In order to get the right to ride a bicycle in cities. Okay, so this is constantly play out along along different lines of inequalities that are often intersecting. Okay, but also this is how cities happen, and this is a photo that is taken from my own research on parkour in Turin, and how playing in places that are not designed to play sport, but that are meaningful. They have a meaning for people who play in them. Also shape and changes the meaning, the image of the place. Sometimes create contestation, but it pushes an idea forward of what kind of city we want to live in as well. Okay, so the idea sometimes is you hear a lot about how we can make sport more inclusive. And to me, this is kind of a limited question, is possibly through this focus, it helps us to understand is what kind of space we create to sport that can make a difference. Whether positive or negative, that might depend, but it's nevertheless important. Okay, so thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Nicola, for this enlightening presentation and lesson. I would immediately give you the floor if there are questions. I'm sure there are questions. Already you have interacted in a very nice way. Just one question for you first, because presenting your lesson on the last time, we just mentioned the fact that in the last Olympic Games, in Paris Olympic Games, some new sport were introduced. Some were already introduced, but like skateboarding, breakdance, and looking at the first image, we know that parkour is having some sportivization process. And in somehow, by listening to your reflections, I was thinking that the sportivization of this practice, so to transform them in a more agonistic practice, reflecting somehow some of the processes of transformation and let's say of the transformation of the city that you have described. No, you said sometime. Okay, in Rio there was like a violent exclusion, but in London this process of gentrification is less evident, less violent, and it's too harsh to do that. The process of sportivization reflect the process of gentrification. It's too ideological, or we can see some similarities, in your opinion.
I would just answer with an example, then I will elaborate. Sometimes there's assumption that the institutionalization or sportivization of some practices that start as informal. You have parkour, which became a recognized sport in 2018, but you can think about skateboarding or breakdancing more recently. Is kind of losing the original spirit. There is a more resistant spirit. There's more like a spontaneous spirit. And my first answer is thinking about the example of skateboarding, in which the institutionalization of skateboarding made it actually quite easier for women who were excluded by a quite entrenched macho culture in skateboarding, misogynist culture in skateboarding, to access and get legitimacy. So I think it really depends on who you ask. And sometimes the people who kind of complain about oh, we are losing the original spirit of the sport, obviously start from their own experience, but they are not aware of the kind of implicit barriers that were at play, including in sport that take place in the urban spaces. We know that urban spaces are not lived in the same way across identities. So as a white man, I can walk the street at night with a different sense of safety and security that maybe other people or women and so on, or person with a disability or an older person. And that's kind of having access to spaces that are legitimated. There is a trade-off, but kind of negotiate some of the boundaries that are created by sport and urban spaces. This is not to say that it's always good, as it is not always bad. It's kind of really depends on I think what it matters there is on whose term this process happened. And I think that's kind of key.
Yeah, also if you think at half pipe in snowboard, for example, probably that the introduction of a completely different approach, less agonistic compared to other winter sports that are just based on the chronometer. They have bring new value in a winter sport, and so they have helped to shape the way sports people act.
Yeah, and just to complicate the picture, so not to say that is always good. These guys that I have worked with in Turin, the place where these photos was taken is a huge post-industrial park, when at some point it was kind of offered to create a kind of parkour equivalent of a skate park. And they were saying, hell no, we know that if you give us this space, you find, they were already finding reasons to kind of contain them there. And one of the points about parkour is you move from point A to point B. So you need to move around different parts of the city. So again, this is to say that the same processes of sportization are very interesting to look at about what claims are made, and who defines why it is good. And there's never a consensus. So these guys doing parkour were not very happy with this, but they were happy that sport could be recognized the parkour could be recognized as a sport in general, because if they were training outside in the city, they could say, well, it's a sport. Why are you bothering me? I'm not doing any damage. And then there was a further argument for them. So I think it's kind of never clear cut, but I think it's interesting to consider on whose term this process happened.
Okay, so let's open up the discussion. What question, what curiosity do you have after this discussion, that this lesson that is somehow include various topics, because we discussed about mega events, we discussed about sport as a contestation, site of contestation. We discussed various. We introduced for the first time informal sport, grassroots sport. No? Because, for example, if you go to the previous slide, speaking about Monfalcone, the Italian town that banned cricket for BBC, you have to think BBC it's a British media, and so for them cricket is one of the national sport. Of course, the best title will be they ban informal cricket, but this is a better way not to sell something that happened. So again, how we introduce like the informal sport, this grassroots sport, something that so far we haven't discussed, but the problem that Rio had, also other cities, Olympic city had, no? And so again, when we discuss about the difference between democracies and authoritarian regime organizing mega event, this problem is for both the situation, but in democracy is more visible because contestation managed to have more space. For Beijing 2008, a lot of urban areas were destroyed, but the echo of this urban transformation didn't arrive to the news, or maybe they were described as modernization, that is the same keyword that then Rio used. So, which curiosity question do you want to raise? Yes?
I have a couple questions. First of all, I was wondering if is there anything you could tell us about the Milan Cortina Winter Olympics? and how it is affecting the region, because I've heard there have been some issues with the planning. And then the second question was related to the problems related to sport mega events, and then in particular relating to the labor rights and the exploitation of migrants, because I actually thought of an example. I recently, a few years back, I read a book, which is not a book about sport, but the protagonist, during his journey from Afghanistan to Italy, actually stops for a few years in Greece, and the period is a few years before the Athens Olympics. And there are a few chapters in the book where the protagonist explains how at the time he was only a child, like 14 years old, and as soon as he arrived, he was immediately illegally employed to work with the infrastructures for the Olympics. And he would be working I don't know, 12 hours a day with no days off. And so I was wondering if can the international community or non-governmental organizations interfere and try to do something about that, or is it too complicated?
Okay, these are two fantastic questions, and thanks a lot for asking them. When it comes to Cortina, and I'm kind of a bit ashamed to say that I'm not completely up to date with the issues. If I were to, so you probably know more than me, but I think what especially Winter Olympics bring to the fore very, very clearly are not just the political issues that we mentioned, but also the planetary issues, the environmental issues that, again, sport mega events carry with them. There was a study just a few years ago that say that at the current prosecution of climate change, very few places will be able to host any Winter Olympic game at all in the next 30 to 50 years. So probably I'm not answering, there's a way of, I'm kind of digressing for your question, which unfortunately I'm not able to offer much more than you know already. But I think is also, again, an issue that is closer to us, where we are now, as an opportunity also to link to this other very big question that relates to sustainability, climate change, the claims that are made around it, and really the scale of the issue that we need to consider when we look at this issue. So apologies for a far from comprehensive answer on this. On the other side, I know the book is a fantastic book. And I think it brings down how, again, different political issues come together in a specific context, like even in the preparation to sport mega events. And by the way, and it's very important to consider them. By the way, the Paris Olympic Games, we've been talking about displacement of residents, but residents are also migrants, and migrants who are undocumented or transiting. And there were many migrants who were employed as well in the making of the Olympic Games, and they were subsequently also displaced and detained in the kind of cleaned up of the city. So this is, again, an ongoing process. And going to your kind of very important questions, what can be done? And again, it links really to the playing out of this politics of denial or acknowledgement. Making this an issue is the first step. It doesn't grant that people will listen or will like what there is to be said, but it's definitely the starting point. And then it plays out in different ways. It plays out through campaigning, lobbying. It plays out to symbolic gestures. One of the most touching gestures that kind of make visible these issues. I don't know if you remember the Algerian team throwing roses in the Seine at the inauguration to remember the massacre of Algerian residents in Paris during the independence war between Algeria and Paris. And these very symbolic gestures, combined with the lobbying, the campaigning, with making it a point of discussion, they have an incremental effect. And there's no happy ending granted for anything, but they are nevertheless very important, especially for those of us who have some degrees of security or privilege to being able to pose these issues at the table in the stage, in the platforms that we have, and it's quite important. And in doing so, I'm thinking about our work. It plays out in working with community organization on the ground, understanding what is important for you, how our research can help to understand better what is happening on the ground, because sometimes people who are doing things then don't have the time to figure out things, and that's where we come in the picture, but also to amplify what they are doing, the issues they are bringing, what is relevant to them, the message that they want to bring. And I think there's a huge role, one of many roles, also for people that are doing research, that have degrees, that will access professional jobs and platforms to make these issues evident. So what about this? Okay, so unfortunately, it's not an exhaustive, we cannot give any solution, but the problem is that the key issue is making the issue evident.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? To this topic, I think we have to take into consideration also the fact that there is probably among the responsible of the lack of attention, there are the sporting media in particular, because sporting media tended to embrace the rhetoric that sport should be separated from politics because it makes their job easier somehow. And if we're with the first class with your colleague the first year, because the Qatar 2022 male World Cup was during this semester, the winter semester, we analyzed the press, and the majority of the sporting media, rather than the political one, tended to undervalue all this situation that, of course, in a country like Qatar that exploit in a systematic way the migrant workers are much evident, to the point that you cannot avoid to discuss. But as the book Francesca mentioned, and as the example of Rio, but it's very, like, it's a situation that we can see all the time. The exploitation of migrant workers in this mega event is clear, because it's something that occurs in all other situations. It's not something that only sports mega event create. But sports mega event, as Nicola mentioned since the first presentation, are like a part of this capitalist system somehow, and so they can keep the last slide, the conclusion. I think it's very easy. It's something that's very easy but important. The first, this first quotation say that sport doesn't only mirror society, but is part of the social political conflict that we live in. It's part of the culture. It's not just something separated from people's life. And so I think your reflection today help us to understand that this important element that in somehow we mainly focus on international politics, and with your lesson today we in somehow introduce concept that we already discussed, but also at other level, not only the level of international politics.
I think she
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Yes,
Vabbè, both question and then we answer.
I wanted to thank you for enlightening me about the situation in Rio, and I'm quite ashamed because I'm half Brazilian and I didn't know. We always talk about inequalities in Brazil, about there are rich neighborhoods and the favelas, and how there are kind of two separate worlds. I wanted to ask you if there are any other similar situations around the world, if anything similar happened, like destroying neighborhoods for building something for the Olympics or other mega events.
Yes, by the way, first, no, that's fine. Let me answer the question first. Yes, there are a few examples, and then they tend to happen where, again, there's a stark inequality in which even local population have access to basic rights. So like housing rights, civil rights, the ability to be able to campaign and claim their rights that should be for them. So in South Africa, that happened, but sometimes it happened, Nicola mentioned this happening as well in China, where the construction of some specific parts of the Olympic Village stadiums necessitated from the organizing perspective, the clearing out of large areas. But again, I wouldn't stress that only where these so evident issues happen are kind of the worst examples or the bad ones, because it happened in Athens for people, and then again, depending on the kind of visibility and access to rights, we tend to forget that sometimes we don't even realize that the entire maybe kind of squatted building in Paris hosting hundreds of thousands of people were not maybe so visible or so striking, and as the case in Rio, but I wouldn't say that the quantity made it, that the fact that there were less people involved or people with no formal rights made it less bad, if you see what I mean. So, and I think, unfortunately, I would say that these dynamics of spatial displacement, they might change because of the context, but the process tends to be quite similar. So
even in Rome 1960, the dimension, of course, was different, but
in Tokyo it happened. So you might imagine, these are countries where it shouldn't happen, but yeah.
So in Paris this summer, there were homeless people in the streets, and for a month they tried to take the homeless people out of Paris in cities and camps, and I think it's like I knew about this summer, and it shocked me. And so for the tourists to come, for every tourist to see like the beautiful Paris, they had to kick the homeless Parisian people out of the city.
And you made a very good point. They were homeless. They are Parisians, nevertheless. Whether you have documents or not, whether you have a house or not to live in, you're still a resident. You're still a dweller in Paris. And then and that happened in Vancouver. So that's again to say it might hit close to home when it happens where you are claiming, where you are from. But again, it was important to see that it happens everywhere. So that there's something very productive to see in the connections, because then you can make a claim that there's something is changed here in this process. You see what I mean? So yeah, no, thanks for the question.
Yeah, so I was curious, who should we blame for such outcomes? I mean, is there specific requirements of the maybe Olympics that the city needs to be constructed, or we need that kind of stadium, or is the government itself is to blame for it?
I mean,
Yeah, this is a difficult question, but I wanted to know your opinion.
yeah. I mean, it's not that difficult. I think there are different stakeholders, and the stakes are different sometimes from local populations. So it's interesting that one of the most common arguments about why sport mega events should happen in a city is the economic development. But since Los Angeles 84, no host really made an income, a positive economic income from the sport mega events. Somebody makes the income, is the IOC or the FIFA, and the organizing committees, but they are private actors or not public actors in the context where the games take place most of the times, and therefore the benefits that come from it don't stay where they are. So I mean, that's if we want to put it in like where we need to look at, how to change some of these dynamics is there could be a good starting point, and it's a great reminder that it doesn't have to be this way. In 1984, we were this close of the Summer Olympic Games not happening. Never happening again, because it's the height of the Cold War.
Three consecutive boycotts.
Yeah, so there was a lot, not really much of a condition, economic viability for this taking place. And Los Angeles kind of urban leadership and political leadership said, okay, we're going to host the games, but at these conditions. And they kind of negotiated to have 75% to get 75% of the economic revenue from the media rights, and a series of actual tangible benefits from the economic output of the games. So it can be possible, but the fact that the power of the stakeholders involved is not the same makes it not for granted. And then again, there are even local interests that make it even more difficult. But it is possible, because actually now we are at the point in which there's not much desire to host sport mega events, and this is a moment in which a lot of people say, okay, we need to redefine a little bit the parameters of how we organize this, and it's a conjuncture where some points can be made.
If you remember, the Agenda 2020 was the first effort to rethink the idea of Olympic City.
Yeah.
I just find out today that skateboarding and breakdance took a part in Olympics game. And how do you agree and support also this idea? Because for me, it's like a hobby, not a professional sport that it's in Olympic Games.
I hope there are no any breakdancers or skaters in the room. Can I ask you, why do you think it's a hobby?
I mean, I think in Olympics game they're like professional sports players. It's breakdance for me. It's just a dance.
I think you're getting to something there, but maybe we are not implying the same thing. I would say that yes, there's a difference between breakdancing and track and field, but I don't think it's about the level of professionality, whether you can really measure that. Is really about the culture that surround them. So to me and to many in the breakdancing culture, might seem a bit kind of odd or strange, or there are some hidden interests behind that, including the desire to get some younger audiences for the sport mega events. Again, as we were saying about the institutionalization of sport, there might be people that are very happy with that because they're legitimized. But I think the core of the issue is that there are practices that they are something else than sport. That doesn't mean they are less than sport. They are something else.
Do you support this idea?
I don't mind. I don't really mind. So it doesn't change. But then again, if you pay attention, there was a breakdancer who made as an act of protest a very kind of simple moves just to
So the picture, now do you remember?
yeah, just to mock this idea, because there's a point in which obviously it becomes something different from the breakdancing that takes place in a public park, and then again, what matters is where it takes place and how and why, with what meaning. But on the professional athletic level, I don't think I have the expertise and the knowledge to measure. I'm not sure it's relevant, but that's my opinion. Yeah.
I was wondering if, like, how much can athletes have an impact on the issues that we've discussed? Because, for example, I was thinking about Sebastian Vettel fighting for sustainability in Formula One, or Ayrton Senna dedicating his entire life to making children's lives in Brazil better and investing in their education system. So, like, how important is the role of athletes?
Okay. It's not. I think there's research showing that it has quite some relevance. I don't know if you remember the iconic image of Mexico 1968, the Black Panthers raised fists.
Yeah, we discussed about athlete activism in the last two lessons.
Yeah, so that is I think is not to ignore. So often too much dismissed as these are very privileged people who should shut up and dribble or run or whatever they're doing, which again fits in the narrative that sport and politics don't mix. But athletes are people with viewpoints, with a vision like everyone else. And the fact that they use the platform to make visible or evident an issue, I think is far from minor. And especially because people who are maybe not usually exposed or interested in some issues, they get it from them. And there's an amplification of some issues that happens in a way that is not the usual way. I don't know, in the UK, Marcus Rashford, was a black British footballer, at some point clashed with the government, with the state, because the state was going to cut free child meals during holidays for child in poverty. And levels of children in poverty in the UK is staggeringly high. We are close to 1/4 of children in the UK. So we are talking about a lot of children. And he made public on his social media saying, I don't agree with this. I'm going to start raise money to step up this issue. And it forced the government to U-turn on these regulations. So that's kind of an example of the issue. It obviously doesn't always play out that way, but it shows the impact and the relevance, and also the relevance of staying silent. And I'm kind of thinking about this, to what extent athletes don't talk, for example, about what's happening in Gaza, for example, when it's clearly something that is affecting their colleagues as well. Olympic athletes have been bombed to pieces, and sport field have been used as detention camps, and so there is an impact on on all levels. But I do agree there's an impact, and it's not just me. There's research showing that.
And then I had also.
So sorry, also this discussion helped us to conclude one element that I didn't underline enough in the last lesson on athlete activism, but I think it's important. We should not pretend by athletes that they took position, because they are not obliged to. So if they feel, they can do it, but they are not obliged to take position on every issue. However, it's important, or should be important, that athletes are aware of what they are doing can cause particular issues. So ignorance is less accepted than not every athlete must be an activist, but athletes should be aware of what international sports provoke, imply, etc.
No, so because I'm curious, I have a more subjective question. Do you think that nowadays mega sports events are becoming increasingly more and more about entertainment and less about sport, about actual sport? Like, what, in your personal perspective, like?
Okay, it's fine. I cannot separate the personal perspective from the research perspective, but I would say the pursuit, the use of athleticism and spectacle are the same, are entwined. So I don't see the one is going is kind of undermining the other, because having more sports, younger sports, is part of the spectacle, and these people, the athletes that compete in these sports, train very hard in relating to the sports they participate